Sometimes it's tough differentiating between what you want and what you need. That struggle is all too real with the Mercedes EQB. And no, I'm not about to get all preachy about luxury vehicles and why you should stick to mainstream ones instead. Quite frankly, there's nothing like this on the mainstream market right now, and the EQB is impressively practical inside considering the relatively small footprint it occupies. No, the problems this thing poses are fundamental to the EV experience itself. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Look, I'm not gonna dangle the carrot here. The biggest problem really is range. This thing is supposed to be good for 365 kilometers, which I don't find that great to begin with, but making matters even worse. When I picked it up the other day, it was fully charged and it only had 276 kilometers of range. And the most I've seen this week after 3 charges is 332 kilometers. That's just not gonna cut it. And that's just not me saying it. KPMG did a study last year that said 79% of Canadians wouldn't consider an EV if it couldn't travel 400 kilometers on a full charge. That puts this thing in a pretty awkward position. No, it's not the only EV out there that offers less than 400 kilometers of range, but that doesn't make it any more excusable, in my opinion, especially because this thing is pretty new. It only arrived in Canada last year. I think it was in some other markets for a year or two before then, but even so, I just don't see why, aside from this being some sort of a compliance car, this would even be brought to market with such limited range. It's not like 400 kilometers is much to ask for. Us Canadians are pretty sensible people. Really, I would be saying maybe 500 or 600 kilometers is that golden number. So the fact that so many of you out there are willing to settle for 400 and this thing can't even do that, well, that is a big letdown. And the other big letdown, no one-pedal driving. I don't even get that. The EQS SUV I just tested not too long ago has a proper one-pedal driving mode. It works really well, brings the EQS to a full stop. This, even in its most aggressive setting, here we go. I'm gonna let off, here we go, slowly releasing. I can see the speedometer counting down here in the head-up display. I'm down to 15 kilometers, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. That's it, 10. Very annoying. Electric vehicles, especially ones this modern, should have full one-pedal driving. No excuses. I really don't like that fact at all. Now, I will say this thing is fairly efficient in spite of its bread loaf design, and we will talk about that a little bit later on, but it's not as efficient as something slippery like the Tesla Model Y. I get that, but all things considered, it's officially rated to consume 21.7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And I've been just above that this week, which is pretty easily explained by the cold conditions and a lot of highway driving. Even coming out to this shoot today, I had to hit the 401 for quite a long stretch. That's gonna make matters worse. So the fact that this thing has been right in that neighborhood all week long, I do really tip my cap to Mercedes for what it accomplished here. Now, those are my big issues with the EQB. And if you made it to this point, I'm going to assume it's because you're still interested in what it has to offer, and that is totally fair. And if you're familiar with the Mercedes lineup, you're probably going to recognize the GLB-Class here, and that's because that's what this thing is based on. Yes, their structures are virtually identical. And I've always liked that crossover. It's got a kind of quirkiness, the really tall greenhouse that looks like a station wagon that's been stretched upright. And that translates here with just a few differences to help this EQB stand out. So there's a plastic panel where the grille used to be, pretty typical of electric vehicles that don't need a big open grille for cooling, as well as different lights front and back, and these amazing wheels.
Simple 5-spoke design, but I really like the blue accents that tie in nicely with the brows in the headlights, as well as these fender badges up front. My only complaint, there's nothing around back that ties in with the rest. Even just some blue EQB letters would really wrap this thing up nicely. Now, around back is where you're going to find one of the EQB's greatest assets, although it is situational because there's 500 liters behind the back seats, but that only applies when the optional third row seats aren't upright. When they are, as you can see, not much room at all. Definitely not going to cut it for that weekly family grocery haul. But then again, pretty cool that something this size even offers a third row in the first place. No, that doesn't mean it's going to work if you've got more than a couple kids, but just like when I reviewed the GLB-Class, it means when the in-laws are in town, you aren't going to have to make alternate arrangements.
Okay, so just like any other EV, the battery pack, it does sit under the floor, and that means there's a little bit less headroom in here than you get in the GLB-Class, but really there's still a ton. All that upright space, that big greenhouse, really does come in handy. I can fit in the second row no problem, and I can almost fit comfortably in the third row. It's a little too tall, but don't forget I am 6'3". I'm not the person you're going to be sticking back there most of the time. I'd imagine that's going to be for kids only. So the fact that I can almost squeeze in the back is a testament to just how well packaged the space is here. And that's something else I really like. This does feel well suited to family life. That applies to the GLB-Class as well as this EQB. Still looks luxurious in here. A lot of these flourishes, this ambient lighting, very cool. But it feels livable and durable. Even this faux leather upholstery, while I come to a stop here, having to hit the brake pedal, I do like it. I think the cabin is pretty cool. I like these circular vents. Some of the stuff I don't like in here, this touchscreen, just not very good. Now, I wasn't expecting the hyperscreen from that EQS, but I didn't really love this back when I tested the GLB or any other Mercedes that has these twin 10.25-inch screens in here. And I really don't like it here. It does have this console controller, just like you get in that GLB-Class, as well as these thumb pads on the steering wheel that were quite literally taken directly from BlackBerry. They control this screen as well as the instrument cluster, but they're just finicky, they're annoying, they're not all that responsive. I've cleaned them, I've tried everything, I've made sure my hands are clean. They just don't really respond as quickly as they should. And the other problem with this interface, it is designed to be used with a controller like this one. Now, originally Mercedes didn't use touchscreens, and you had this rotary dial down here on the console, and that's why the infotainment interface looks the way it does, so that you could scroll across it. Well, now that it's touch, it's just kind of annoying to have to swipe through all these different icons. When you look at a more traditional display, including the one in that EQS, it has those tile icons that more closely mirror a smartphone. And speaking of smartphones, that's a big issue for me. This thing does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which I normally love, but it has been an absolute mess. And no, it has nothing to do with my phone. Recently updated the operating system. It also worked fine in the Volvo SC60 Recharge that I dropped off the morning I picked this thing up. I was able to send texts and do all the stuff I normally do. As soon as I picked this up, it was dropping the connection. It wasn't recognizing voice commands. It would read text messages back to me. It would allow me to tell it I wanted to read a text back or send a text, but then it would say there were problems. It's just been annoying. I also hate that it doesn't fill the whole screen. It's got those black bars on either side. It's like I said before, it's like watching 4:3 shows on a 16:9 TV. It's very, very bad. It's just not a good look, especially in a vehicle like this. And no, Mercedes isn't the only brand to struggle with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in a widescreen format. Hyundai and Kia have had the same issues, but I don't like it. Really needs a fix in that regard. Now, getting back to the battery pack, it's got a usable capacity of something like 66.5 kilowatt hours, which isn't that great, especially the size of this thing. I feel like it could fit a bigger battery pack, but What do I know? I'm not an automotive engineer. Anyways, supposed to take about 32 minutes in ideal conditions on a level 3 charger. It maxes out at 100 kilowatts, 32 minutes to get from 10 to 80%. I took it from 34 to 100% the other day at a 50 kilowatt charger in an hour and 13 minutes, I think. Cold weather. I was really impressed with that charging time, but I do have to go off on a little tangent here, and it has nothing to do with Mercedes, and it has everything to do with the charging infrastructure in Canada. I know you guys have heard me go on about this, but this morning was very frustrating, and there's a little bit of a backstory to it, okay? When I tested that EQS not too long ago, I went to a nearby Petro-Canada, which I usually love. It's kind of close to where I shoot, decided to go there. All the chargers were out of service. I was annoyed, but I went to a flow station that wasn't too far off, and it worked just fine. So then last week when I had the S60 recharge, I did kind of the same thing. I went straight to that flow station because it's only a level 2 anyways, and it was more reliable. So I decided to go back there today with this EQB so I could top up the battery. I was down to about 66%. It was like 5:30 in the morning. I got there. The flow station wouldn't work. So then I had to go to Petro-Canada, except the Petro stations were mislabeled. There are only 2 stations at that Petro-Canada, but on the app, they show numbers 8 and 9. Physically, the numbers on them are 1 and 2, so I was left guessing which one, and guess what? Yeah, I guessed wrong, so I had to start the process all over again, and I know that sounds like small potatoes, but when was the last time you showed up at a gas station to fill up your gas-powered car and you had to guess which pump to pull up to, or you pulled up to the pump and it was broken, or the whole gas station was out of service? That's what's going on with EVs and the charging infrastructure that we're dealing with. And honestly, it's making me a little bit jaded. I love electric vehicles. I'm very optimistic about them. I really do encourage people to check them out. But the more of these issues I experience, the grumpier I get. And this morning was just brutal. So anyways, if you charge at home 240 volts, you should be able to use a level 2 charger and hit a full charge in about 6.5 hours. So not too bad. And the EQB, well, it only comes in the 350. Other markets, you can choose between a couple different versions, but in Canada, we only get the EQB 350. So it makes something like 288 horsepower and 354 pound-feet of torque. Pretty reasonable. There's no issues with it. It's not blindingly quick, but it does have that EV quickness you've come to expect. When you get onto the throttle, it'll really giddy up and go. It's great for passing, but I do have to say, this has the same issue that I noticed in the EQS. I don't know if it's fair to call it an issue, but I do prefer driving in eco mode because, hey, I'm trying to be efficient, especially in something like this that has limited range. But there's this really kind of weird quirk about the Mercedes software, the way that eco mode has been programmed, where there's almost like a resistance, or that the pedal is disconnected. There's a lack of response when you first get your foot into it, and that's whether you're rolling away from a stop or you go to pass or merge onto the highway. It can be a little disconcerting, especially the first few times you notice it. It honestly can feel like nothing is going to happen when you stab into that throttle pedal. It's very bizarre, but other than that, very conventional experience. It looks like a GLB-Class in here, and it kind of drives like one too. Okay, there's nothing that really screams electric vehicle, and I like that. And I think a lot of you out there would like that too. It makes the transition to electrification that much easier. And yes, the EQB does have all-wheel drive. It's got one electric motor up front and another in the back, so tons of traction. Again, it's just very friendly for Canadian life in that regard. Range is the bigger problem, and the other problem is price, because this thing starts right around 76 grand in Canada, which is $6,000 more than a comparable Tesla Model Y. I'm not talking about the performance version, the long range, all-wheel drive, and that thing has way more range. 531 kilometers is the official estimate versus the 300 $365 this thing is supposed to give you. That really is tough. Now, I am not comparing the quality. I'm not comparing what they have as far as equipment and features. That is not what we're here to do. I'm just saying, dollar for dollar, if you're looking for an EV that can cover long distances and have a decent amount of room, especially for a family of four, well, the Tesla Model Y is going to give you more for less money. And then this one has a bunch of options added to it that only make it more expensive. So it's got, I don't know, the premium package, I think it's called. So you get a head-up display, which I really like, augmented reality for the nav system, a few other features, stereo, some good stuff. But that adds like $5,000 to the price of the EQB. And then it's also got the intelligent drive package. That's another $3,500, and that's how you get a full advanced safety suite, including adaptive cruise control that has an auto lane change function. So yes, you have to keep your hands on the steering wheel, but you activate the signal and it will guide the EQB into whatever lane you want to, assuming it's clear. That is really cool, but then this one I'm driving, well, it is something like $85,000 before tax. So it makes it even tougher to see the value in it when you consider that limited range, as well as how much more expensive it is than that Tesla Model Y. The other thing to keep in mind is this does not qualify for the federal EV rebate, and I don't think it qualifies for any provincial or territorial ones either. I'm not saying it's not worth the money. It just really is something to take a hard think about before you commit to it. The unfortunate thing is there's really nothing like it on the market, but that range I really do think is going to be a problem for a lot of you out there. To recap, I like the approachability of the Mercedes EQB, all the space it has inside, and that it's fairly efficient in spite of its limited range. I don't like that it can't travel very far on a full charge, the infotainment system it borrows from the GLB-Class, or that it doesn't have one-pedal driving. Look, it's not as if I dislike the Mercedes EQB entirely, but it definitely comes up short of my expectations. What does that mean for you? Well, it depends on what you plan to do with it, but I could see this thing working as a second vehicle for in-town commuting and getting the kids to school or soccer. What I worry about is anything more than that, which could seriously stretch its usefulness for the average Canadian shopper. And that's not me talking, folks. That's pure statistics.